Hey my friends, it's Steve's Guitar Channel, and today I want to talk about why people are leaving the US now more than ever. And I know I've made a lot of videos about this topic in the past year and a half or so, but I want to make this video particularly in a way that a person outside of this country can understand what I'm talking about, because a lot of people who don't live in this country may not know what's going on here or understand why people are leaving, because they still think we are living the American dream because of what the media paints about our country on the outside, about how our economy is great when it's really not. And there have just been a ton of trends, including my own videos about why people are leaving America or why I'm leaving America, and tons of news channels explaining why people are leaving America. And as a person who wants to leave America myself, I'm going to explain the topics of why I want to leave America. So to get on with the point, the reason people, including myself, are leaving America, it's very obvious for anyone who lives here and even people outside of this country who have heard about it. There is a terrible homeless situation. Everywhere you go countrywide, even here in Cincinnati, I have traveled all across the country, and everywhere you go, you just see homeless people on the sidewalks. And California and New York are the worst states for the homeless situations, where people are living in tents, just on the sidewalks, living in ghetto setup tents with piles of trash and poop, and the smell becomes an aura around 40 feet or so. And because of the homeless situation from inflation and no affordable housing and all these new rules in between of getting an apartment like 3.5 times the income nonsense that I didn't have to go through when I had my first apartment in San Diego 5 years ago, has become overwhelming. And America is starting to look like a third world country for this reason alone.
I mean, look at this. I'm 32 years old. And I live in the suburbs with my parents in the basement. And I was 27 years old when I had my first apartment in San Diego, 28 when I had my second apartment down the road during the lockdowns, and 29 when I had my last apartment in Miami, Florida, before the economy went upside down and inflation skyrocketed. This should not resemble America at all. And even though there is no affordable living anywhere, they are building new houses all the time. For example, right behind our neighborhood, which was cornfields and farmland for the longest time, they have started building new houses here since 2022. And these houses are being sold for $700,000 minimum. And that to me is like, that is not helping the American citizens like you and me. The homeless situation still rises, even though they are building new houses that we don't need. People are leaving the suburbs more than they are entering. They want to live in a more walkable area where they can walk and not be car dependent, but they're building new houses in suburbs all the time, changing the climate. About a year after I lost my apartment in Miami, I went to bartending school and passed with a 98%. That was when my neighbor down the road keeps talking smack about me to my mother and not my face about all these things, like I'm not successful for my age, or says all this nonsense to me about how terrible my car looks, or just overall talks smack about me but doesn't say it to my face directly. And this person is like fat and out of shape and has a husband she doesn't like, kids she can't afford, and pets they can't afford to take care of properly, and an oversized house they can't afford to live in properly, and is overall miserable and unhappy, but has a lot to say to me without saying it to me. And I have been living in this neighborhood for years before I started traveling across the country without any problems with anybody, until this neighbor came along and talking smack about me. And this is right after my dad passed away in January 2022, and has all this nonsense to say about me. This house we live in was sold for $280,000 when we bought it in 2012. When I looked at what it is today, it's about $515,000 for this same house. I remember 10 years ago, a neighborhood in Los Angeles was about minimum of $400,000 in the Hollywood area. I remember in 2002, we bought our third house in Bakersfield, California, brand new, for $177,000. With the mortgage and property taxes and everything in between, I believe it was around $1,300 a month or something like that. We sold it in 2005 for $400,000. The same house is now $550,000 for the same house we bought brand new in 2002 for $177,000. We bought our first house in Jacksonville, Florida for $88,000, 15 minutes from the coast. To see how high home prices are skyrocketing and paychecks and wages are staying stagnant, and then you get neighbors like the one down the road I was telling you about who keeps talking smack about how I don't have a house. In America, we have a terrible homeless situation everywhere. Inflation is on the rise, and no one can afford to live on minimum wage, let alone $20 an hour in most areas. It's not a livable wage, and the wages are staying stagnant while inflation is outpacing your wages. And home prices are on the rise, and so are violent crimes. They call ourselves the land of the free, but what good is that quote if you can't be safe in your own neighborhood or your own city? For the past few months, there was a car that was driving by our neighborhood, and I thought it was someone attempting to do a home invasion and a break-in, because we had an attempted break-in a few years ago where cops were in our neighborhood after 1 a.m. questioning me when I was walking in my neighborhood after coming home from bartending. And when I questioned the car that was driving here, it was the people dropping off papers. That's how paranoid I am from these violent crimes on the rise. For example, it is 2 a.m. in my neighborhood right now, and I am taking walks because usually at this hour I go and have a smoke in the car, and then I walk around to air myself out as a courtesy and have some exercise in between. And I have been doing this for years without any problems. I used to go in, have a smoke, take a walk around, and then come back in after like maybe 30 minutes or so, and never had a problem whatsoever. But now it just seems like it's not what it used to be, because like 2 years ago we had an attempted break-in at the end of the house, like I mentioned earlier. The year prior, one of our new neighbors at the time, who doesn't live here anymore, was like all paranoid coming home from the driveway with the lights on, calling the cops. And there were like 7 cop cars here until like sunrise, and we have never had any kinds of activity like that before, ever. I've been seeing a lot of cars drive through the night that don't live here or come around here. Like, again, for years I've been doing this, and now it just seems like it's getting less and less safe.
We are also on year 4.5 of this communist nonsense where we have very limited freedoms, very limited choices, very limited income, very limited hours, very limited salaries, very limited quantities, very limited qualities on choices and products and resources such as grocery stores. We have very limited resources and time on businesses being open. The nightlife is very limited to none. We have very limited much of everything, and we went from having an exotic nightlife to affordability and everybody's lives getting better with quality groceries and fruits and vegetables to barely anything. And it is starting to look like Haiti, Cuba, Dominican Republic, and a dictation of North Korea every day. We also have ridiculously high taxes, especially California and New York, and both those states are broke like a joke. Really think about that. California is known to be the 5th largest economy in the world because of what it has to offer, but the state has no money whatsoever. Same with New York. They have no money whatsoever either. Their subways are out of date, their infrastructure is crumbling with a terrible homeless situation, but they just keep adding a nickel and a dollar to these taxes, especially in California with gas prices, but yet the country has no money whatsoever. And why is that? Because the Federal Reserve, that has been screwing this country since 1913 on the Federal Reserve Act, which is the 16th Amendment, they print the money, they loan it to the government, they charge the government interest, and they tax the U.S. citizens to pay for it. All of those tax dollars do not go to the government. And now the whole country has just become a joke compared to like Singapore and China. Like I mentioned on the limited resources, businesses are dying left and right. I've made a lot of videos when I was in downtown Cincinnati for the nightlife, playing guitar on the weekends. The one thing I noticed very quickly was that the nightlife was dying. Like, I remember in 2015, it had an extraordinary nightlife like New York and San Francisco, where you can go there in your suit and tie like I did in my 20s. You'll see like crowds of people walking through the bridge from Kentucky. You'll see people walking to the bars. You'll see crowds of people on the sidewalks, as much as 30 or more on every corner. Every bar and restaurant had its lights on, live music playing, and you'd see people backed up to the door enjoying their drinks, having a good time, where you had to like dance your way in and wait in front of 10 people or more for a cocktail, 3 bartenders running around, and people are waiting patiently for their drinks, and everybody's talking and having a good time, sharing their ideas and innovation. And it was overall a fun time to go out on Friday and Saturday nights. But you fast forward today, that's not a thing anymore. The bars are dying, the restaurants are dying, there's no foot traffic, nothing going on. Most of it's dead after 10 p.m. When I went to a bar that I've been going to for 10 years, there was like 3 people, including me, after 10 p.m. and 1 bartender who looked like he didn't care about being there or you. Nobody there was happy, nobody was social. The bartender just looks at you like, when are you gonna leave? And more importantly, tip me. Overall, it's a dying environment. And I think one of the reasons behind that could be that people are starting to realize drinking is stupid, but inflation is so high on the rise for a drink. It's like $13 for an old fashioned when it used to be $8 like 9 years ago. The final reason people have been starting to leave the country more than ever is because of the 2020 George Floyd riots. They were blocking roads. They were causing chaos and destruction. And here in Cincinnati, when it started, they were breaking into the city hall, causing total chaos, setting things on fire, looting and destroying businesses, like robbing Target when they claimed no justice, no peace, but they were really just domestic terrorists. And that alone was what caused people to leave the U.S. because they were sick of the domestic terrorists. And the 2022 abortion riots, or whatever that was, they were doing the same thing in downtown Cincinnati, and most of it was coming from younger people. And never before in like my entire life of protests have I seen people waving communist flags and masks, blocking roads, causing destruction and chaos. It was literally starting to look like what you see in Somalia and Middle Eastern countries. And that was the reason people were leaving Cincinnati, and is the reason people are leaving the U.S. more than ever.
I remember back in 2007 when I was in high school in the state of Maine, the economy was set so you were able to find a job full-time at a grocery store or do stuff like be a server at a restaurant afterwards and be able to afford an apartment down the road or somewhere in between town at a low-income area. All in all, I think the maximum of the rent was maybe $800 a month tops, like that at the worst peak. But you fast forward today, that's not a thing anymore. Getting a job is nearly impossible. Inflation's outpacing your wages. The rent in Portland, Maine was like $2,000 a month for a tiny studio with no car smart parking. Like, that just blows my mind. Like, no amount of income or wages in most of that area is able to keep up with that. Like, inflation and the rise of rent is outpacing our income and wages. It's ridiculous. Like, America's looking like a third world country every day. I remember in 2022 when I got back on my feet after losing everything in Miami, I finished bartending school with the 98, and then I had a catering job bartending for the weekends on mostly weddings. With tips on average, I was ranging between $18 and $22 an hour, and then I did a couple days a week doing DoorDash where I made about $125 a night when it was open. So I remember with both of that combined, I had a rental history of my apartment in San Diego. I then had a rental history of my second apartment, which was the same company to that apartment during the lockdown of 2020. Then I had my studio apartment in Miami, and even though I didn't have 3.5 times the income like they wanted, I was able to get a co-signer from a third-party company, and that's how I was able to get my apartment. But at this apartment, they were like, nope, sorry, you need 3.5 times the annual income. We're going to reject you. And they even sent me a letter saying, we rejected you because you have an insignificant source of income, which basically felt like a wage discrimination in a kind of way, even though I had the income and sources to be able to afford it. They are really picky on who they choose, and it just didn't seem American at all, because I've seen people living in Boston, San Francisco, and even like New York City renting an apartment that's way over their income. Like, they're barely able to get by, but they get approved, but I got denied for even having the income to afford it by twice. And that to me was just like, so am I still in America, or am I living on the land of the greed? Seeing what the country and the world in that matter was like 5 years ago, where the economy was getting better and tech companies were becoming the future, paying livable wages and doing something that I loved every day, living in San Diego and traveling across the country, and everybody's lives getting better, quality was getting better, people were getting along, and the world was becoming a much safer place than it has been in the time of history. And it being the American dream,
But then I see the direction of where America is today, and that to me is like, I don't get it. I don't get why that's what I see compared to what it was 5 years ago. And COVID is over and has been for years, but it just seems like most countries around the world are bouncing back, but America just seems like it's sinking every day. Like, with all these people having to live in these ghetto set up tents with cars on the side or plywood and piles of trash, graffiti, and this aura smell of fecal matter and urine within 40 feet, and seeing all these rules that are unconstitutional, like, I swear to God, America is starting to look like Brazil, Haiti, Cuba, and a dictation of North Korea every day.